This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMuddstah. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMuddstah will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang.
Hey gang, and welcome back. I'm still a bit sick, but on the mend, so today's game has my voice a little bit weird. In today's game, we have Felix playing Tayam, keeping 2 forests, plains, Abzan Ascendancy, Path to Exile, Hearthstone, and Renegade Rallier. Maxim has brought back his Braids deck, keeping Drownyard Temple, Swamp, Urborg, Cabal Coffers, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Seb once more is playing Jodah the Unifier, but is built around legendary dragons. He keeps a Swamp, Windswept Heath, Hollowed Fountain, Gannix, Bloom Tender, Wayfarer's Bauble, and Flooded Strand. I am playing Shorikai, keeping Aerial Surveyor, Mobilizer Mech, Mystic Sanctuary, Exotic Orchard, 2 plains, and a Boreal Shelf. Max wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Swamp. I play a tapped Boreal Shelf. Seb plays a Command Tower and taps it for mana to cast a Wayfarer's Bauble. Felix plays a tapped Blossoming Sands, gaining 1. Max's turn has him playing an Urborg, and he casts a Nimble Right Schematic, making a 1/1 construct token as it enters. For my turn, I play an Island and pay 2 for a Mobilizer Mech. Seb just drops a Swamp and pays 2 for a Bloom Tender. Felix has a Forest for turn and pays 2 as well for a Mana Rock with an Arcane Signet. Max tries to reassure the table that he isn't cheating and plays at the Cabal Coffers that we know he had in his opening hand. He activates it for 3, which is enough to cast Braids. He then moves to combat, swinging the construct at Seb for 1. Afterwards, he passes to his end step, sacrificing the schematic to the Braids trigger. He gets to make another construct as it goes to the graveyard, and each of his opponents have to decide to sacrifice something, which we don't, which has each of us losing 2 life, while Max draws 3 cards. He then has to discard down to 7, pitching a Drownyard Temple. I draw and play a Plains. I tap 3 mana for Fabricate, and go to find an artifact to put to hand. I reveal a Solemn Simulacrum tentatively, and decide that the ramp is worth it, plus also having a body to crew things up with. Seb plays a tapped Hollowed Fountain, and then taps his 2 untapped lands to cast his own copy of Arcane Signet. He then taps the Signet and Bloom Tender to crack the Bauble, going to find a basic to put to field. Felix untaps and draws while Seb is searching. He plays a Forest and taps 2 for Sakura Tribe Elder, passing to Max after that. Max plays a Swamp for turn after drawing and activates the Coffers again, this time making 4. He uses it for a Cryptghast and then taps his last Swamp for 2 mana to cast a Zulaport Cutthroat. Moving to combat, he goes at Felix with the constructs. Felix blocks one of them with Sakura Tribe Elder and sacrifices it before the damage is dealt. This then has Felix taking 1 while he's finding a basic to put to the field. Max then moves to his end step and sacrifices a construct token, and once more his opponents sacrifice nothing. This has each of his opponents losing 2 life while he draws 3 cards. Plus he also gains 1 more life as the Zulaport Cutthroat drains his opponents for 1 as well, from seeing the creature die. I untap and draw, playing an Exotic Orchard as my land for turn. I then cast the Solemn Simulacrum that I'd found, and go to find an island for the field. I pass to Seb after that. Seb plays a Windswept Heath, and then taps enough mana for Jodah the Unifier. With his commander out, Seb follows up with his first of many legendary dragons, casting Gannix. He legendary cascades into a 4 or less drop, revealing until he hits Sylvia Brightspear. Ganix then enters and makes Seb a treasure token. Seb then cracks his Windswept Heath to go and find a land, and announces he'll pass turn. During the end step, Felix uses Path to Exile and targets the Crypt cast on Max's side. Felix untaps and draws. He casts Tayam in his main phase and passes to Max after that. Max draws and plays another Swamp. He activates the coffers for 5 mana using 4 of it to cast the newly released Gixian Puppeteer. He then uses the rest of his lands and the floating mana to cast Woestrider, getting a goat token as it comes in. Max then passes through his phases to his end step and sacrifices the goat to the Braids trigger. This has the Cutthroat triggering and drains his opponents for 1. We all choose not to sacrifice anything again, which has us each taking 2 from Braids and Max drawing 3 cards. The draw triggers Max's newly cast Gixian Puppeteer, which has his opponents lose another 2 life, and he gains 2 life. He then has to discard down to 7 and passes to me. I play a Plains and tap 4 mana to cast Anchor to Reality, sacrificing the Solemn as part of the cost to cast it. This has me drawing a card from the Solemn dying, and I go to find a vehicle card to put to field. I grab a Thunderhawk gunship, which as it enters, makes 2 Astartes warriors, and I pass after that. Seb untaps and draws for turn. He plays a Flooded Strand, and then casts Garruk's Uprising, which draws a card as it enters. He then taps the Bloom Tender for 1 of each color of mana, and some lands to help cast Silumgar, the Drifting Death. He gets his legendary Cascade from Jodah, revealing until he hits Thraxus the Butcher. Thraxus entering makes Seb a treasure and draws him a card from the Uprising, and then Silumgar entering does the same as well. Seb then cracks the Flooded Strand, losing 1 for a Plains. He then taps some lands to help cast Rivaz of the Claw, and cascades again thanks to Jodah. He ends up just shuffling because he's nothing at 2 or below that's legendary. He then moves to combat, swinging Jodah, Ganix, and Sylvia at Max. Before moving to blocks, Max sacrifices a creature to scry with the Woestrider and drains his opponents again for 1 thanks to the Zulaport Cutthroat. He then does this again by sacrificing the Cutthroat, while Seb is counting up the pump from Jodah. He also mentions to Max that his creatures all have Trample, and his dragons also have Double Strike. Max decides to block Sylvia with the Gixian Puppeteer and Woestrider, but still takes a massive hit, dropping to 6. With the Puppeteer dying, Max gets to bring back the Cutthroat, and Seb then passes. Felix draws for turn and wishes he had more mana for a board wipe that he's got in hand. He can't seem to draw lands though, and has to settle for a Devoted Druid instead. It comes in with a Vigilance counter thanks to Tayam, and Felix then taps 1 of each colors of his commander to cast Abzan Ascendancy. He then passes through his phases, getting to put a +1/+1 counter onto each creature he controls. Max plays a disgusting white bordered swamp after drawing for turn, and activates the Cabal coffers for 6 this time. He pays 3 of it for a Grim Tutor, and cuts his life total in half to go and find a card to put to hand. With the 3 mana floating, he also taps 3 lands to put to stack a very welcome Deadly Tempest. We all then lose life equal to the amount of creatures we control that are destroyed, but Max is able to get his life back as he drains each of his opponents for 2 more, which results in his life total not changing thanks to the Cutthroat triggers. He then passes after that. My turn has me playing an island, and I tap 4 to cast Shorikai. I activate my commander, drawing 2 and discarding 1, and get to make a pilot token. I then tap the pilot to crew up the mobilizer mech, which triggers it, and that crews up the Thunderhawk gunship. I could kill Max at this point, but Seb feels like the bigger threat, so I go at him, dropping him to 7. Seb untaps and draws. He asks how many cards I have in hand, to which I reply 5. He then counts up his mana and taps enough to put to stack a Primal Surge. I unfortunately have no counter for this, but we still need Seb to reveal the order in case it's Dragon Tempest, Scourge of Valkis, or Terror of the Peaks are his last cards. Sadly, only 4 cards deep, Seb reveals a Dragon Tempest, and the table knows when it's dead, scooping it up to Seb. Game review time, so hopefully my voice wasn't too distracting. And I can kinda see why people are complaining about Jodah being too strong. The Cascade is very good, and the fact that you hit a legendary something, typically a creature, which in turn pumps up your entire board, can really get out of hand. I think at this point Seb has decided to move away from the Primal Surge based deck, so it's less permanent based and probably have a bit more fun spells. Braids is still a very strong commander, and that Gixian Puppeteer was just making things so painful every time we didn't sacrifice a permanent that Max did. I was a little surprised that Max only kept an opener with 5 cards, but after seeing a few of his turns where basically each of his opponents were losing 2 to 4 life and he was drawing 3 cards during the end step, it kinda made sense as to why. This was one of 2 games that we filmed with Felix playing his Tayam deck, and thankfully the second one is a much better showing, so be sure to look forward to that in the future. I'm still working heavily on my Shorikai deck, and there's a lot of new cards especially coming out in the Jumpstart that I'm thinking about adding to it. I have been a huge fan of the new Warhammer 40,000 cards, and they've been my vehicles of choice when tutoring.
This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.